Welcome to the show and to a slightly different format of the Fully Charged Show for today. Now, we know that we are experiencing some really unprecedented times with regards to the energy crisis, and we know that we haven't necessarily addressed this head on with the channel. So we thought it was about time that we got Dan and Robert together so we can have a little conversation and see what we can expect to address some of these issues over the next couple of months. So, Dan and Robert, thank you very much for joining us. I think let's start off with some real hard-hitting questions. What do you make of the current energy crisis right now?
This could get political. Do you want to go first?
Well, I'm only going to say it is something, because I'm the oldest member of the company. I've never experienced this before in my life. This degree of increase in sudden, like really a jump in energy costs is unprecedented. I don't think we've ever experienced it before, and it does have so many knock-on impacts that we can't really even envisage yet. And so it is extremely worrying and incredibly frustrating, because the one thing I know above all else is the cost of wind energy has not increased. The cost of solar energy has not increased. The cost of gas has gone off the scale, hundreds and hundreds of percent increase. And yet we're all having to suffer because of that, where a lot of the viewers of the Fully Charged Show are signed up to green tariffs. They're supporting energy companies that support renewables, and we're not getting the benefit of that at the moment. And that is certainly it's a very complicated topic, but there's a lot of movement to separate that, to say, I buy my energy from a green energy supplier or a renewable energy supplier, and therefore it doesn't cost the same as the gas. And it's incredibly difficult and incredibly political. It's really complicated.
Well, I think the danger is, as a channel, we talk about electric cars and sometimes about heat pumps and things like that. And for a lot of people, it might seem financially unattainable. In fact, it is unattainable. And from our perspective, I think we are really acutely aware of what's going on, to the extent that actually we will be addressing that directly in the output on our channels, on our podcasts, our live shows as well in the coming months. But yeah, to Robert's point, it is a time actually where this is becoming a real wedge issue as well. Yeah. So there are obviously plenty of good people who have invested in renewable energy tariffs, or who have got solar panels on their roofs, have bought an electric car because they've watched the Fully Charged Show, who can see the benefit, but we're still a minority. And actually, we want to actually make that a majority over time. But there are a lot of people acting in bad faith, using this as a way of saying, actually, we need to start fracking and things like that. And we're very disturbed to see the spectre of that coming back, even if it's probably not a realistic prospect. No. It's something which gets some people quite energized, but we don't think it's a realistic prospect. So I think from our perspective, we've got to communicate even more on this particular subject.
I think there's some really interesting things that you both mentioned there, in that the cost of renewable energy hasn't changed. And actually, worse than that, that it's not a supply and demand issue. In fact, the more that you have, it's not vulnerable to those same kind of price fluctuations. So we're experiencing these enormous fluctuations. We're experiencing a lot of anger towards the energy companies as well. But what do you think should be being done about it?
Well, there's a slight distinction here as well, because I think if you were on the outside looking in and you didn't follow the energy industry closely, you might think everyone's raking it in at the expense of the consumer, but it's a bit more nuanced than that. So, you know, the parent companies, the Centricas of this world, the Shells of this world are making an awful lot of money. But for the renewable energy suppliers, it's a much more marginal game. So we work a lot with Octopus, OVO, Good Energy, and actually for those guys, it isn't a time of high profit. It's probably an extremely stressful time, I think, to be running an energy supplier. So I'd make that caveat, but I think there is no way that we can get through the winter without some sort of large-scale intervention from the British government. If you imagine that we're not talking about inflationary rates of energy of 10 to 20%, we're talking about hundreds of percent worth of increase, potentially £2,000 or £3,000 or £4,000 more per household. Imagine taking that out of the economy, because if that money has to go on energy, it's not going to go anywhere else. So that would cripple what is already a beleaguered economy. So I think there will have to be intervention. In the news today, there's been talk of £100 billion over 2 years, and at least that would give us the time to get our house in order, literally and in real terms, and actually start insulating Britain and start putting in some of these technologies we know to be better over the next year or two. But this volatility isn't going away.
Yeah.
People need to understand this is the beginning of the end for fossil fuels, and the volatility is going to get worse. So if you are able to install those things where you can generate your own energy, then fantastic. But obviously the bulk of people can't. So you need to look at things like insulation and cheaper measures, and turning your radiators down, or just and it's criminal that that's the case in the sixth richest economy in the world. But that's where we are, and I think we can actually help to communicate to people what they can do, whether it's the cheaper options or perhaps the slightly more medium, longer term options which require a bit more investment.
It is a savage indictment of this country, and this goes beyond any one political party because it dates back for many decades, but our housing stock is the worst insulated in Europe, and the fact that we can march with a placard say, yes, we're the worst insulated in Europe, is tragic. And there was a time when there was really genuine government support to help people insulate their homes, to explain to them the importance of it. And that was called Let's Cut the Green Crap. And that was a previous Prime Minister who I don't even want to name. The ignorance and the stupidity and the short-sightedness of that is vomit-inducing now. This is why our people are going to suffer now, is because we didn't do the green crap, and it was just sort of flippant green crap, let's get rid of that. It was critically important for the poorest people in this country to have well insulated homes, and we don't have it. And they only deserve to be rejected from society, the scum that run us at the moment. But you can cut that bit.
I'll keep it in.
I don't know if we can. But I think it raises an exceptionally good point that the technologies that we have spoken about on the show, they do come with total cost of ownership benefits. Of course they do. But there is a step that you need to reach to afford some of those things. And I think we're entering a period of time where we need to acknowledge that budgets don't necessarily stretch that. There haven't been the policies in place to enable people to experience the benefits of sustainable technologies. And actually now we need to start talking about them.
I mean, possibly worse than that, because I was at the coalface and I was close to the renewable heat incentive. I was close to the Green Deal. I was close to a lot of those different campaigns, the feed-in tariff, all those sorts of things. I was outside of government, but I was close to those things. And actually, what's worse for an industry is a lack of stability. Is actually you pour subsidy in and then you pull the carpet away, and that's difficult. So it's actually quite difficult to find someone to fit some of these and install some of these technologies now. Because why would you take a chance on an industry that might be subsidised for a short period of time? And unfortunately, with the current government we've got, you can actually see a lurch back to, actually, we don't want to build onshore wind turbines, or we might want to, get more gas, even though economically that just doesn't work.
Sense.
Environmentally, that's a disaster as well. So it is a worrying time, but we do want to talk about heat pumps, for example, and electrification of heat. There is actually a £5,000 grant now for heat pumps, for example. But it's on us also to talk about energy hacks and other things that people can do where they really just don't have to spend much money to do that. So I think from our perspective, when it comes to the channel, we feel that responsibility. So I'm really pleased to say that from October, we're revamping. Some people might have seen this already. We're turning Fully Charged Plus into the Everything Electric show. And we're actually really doubling down on home energy content. So we're working on different formats of home energy episodes, a lot of which will come out from October till the end of the year, hopefully to help give some guidance. It is a bit of a minefield. How do I get these technologies installed? What do I do? And quite often there's a lot of conflicting advice. So hopefully we can really, really help in that regard.
We're definitely in the very unique position that we have this bird's eye view of what's going on. And I think we owe it to our audience to give some clarity on the whole spectrum of solutions. So, Robert, I'm going to ask you a question. You're the oldest person in this trio. Cast your mind back to 1974 and the oil crisis then. And there have been many comparisons between what we're experiencing now and 1974. What sort of parallels do you see, and what gives you hopefully cause for optimism that we can weather this storm?
I mean, the really critical differences. So I have a very strong memory of cycling along the street. It was actually in Bath, in the west of England, past probably a 3 or 4 mile queue of cars on my bicycle, and going, this stuff doesn't work. This is not working anymore. And it wasn't so much price increase, and it was just shortages. You just couldn't buy. It didn't matter how much money you had, you couldn't buy petrol. But we knew of people who had hundreds of cans of petrol in their shed in the garden, and that was illegal. You couldn't do that, and they'd be charged with a crime for doing that. But there was absolutely no alternative at that time. If you had a house, you had a gas boiler, or you burnt coal, or you had there was no technological alternative. If you had a car, that was it. And some electric cars were developed then with lead acid batteries, and there was always a man. It's usually in Coventry. There was one individual man with a small car that was always looked like a lump of cheese. They were always there, and they were tiny little 2-seater electric cars. There was no alternative. So the difference now is we have enormous alternatives to fossil burning technology, really quite advanced, and there's a lot more coming. So that's the only possible, I'm gripping onto a cliff of despair, and I know that there is some possible, a brighter future. It's going to be incredibly difficult, but there are alternatives. At that time, the alternative was what I did, which was to reject it completely and just use a bicycle and public transport, because you couldn't use a car. So I guess that is the difference. And it didn't feel quite the same as this, because it didn't affect quite as many things, although there were power cuts. Now I'm thinking about it, there were power cuts and empty supermarkets. It was a nightmare. But because I was young, I didn't really care. If I was my age now, then I would have been really threatened by it, But,
I've heard you several times recently say that the barriers now are psychological.
Yes, not technical.
Not technological. And I think that's absolutely spot on. I think that's why there's a big tension, because actually, if you were in the old game of oil and gas, you might be rather threatened by the fact that people might just use the sun or wind to power cars, for example, or power houses. So that's why there's a tension. But there really, really is a panoply of different options, whether it's heat pumps, or it's the TEPIO zero emission boiler, or it's smart thermostats, smart hot water tanks.
I could go heat battery technology.
Heat batteries. We could go on and on and on. Those exist now, and obviously it's about making them economic, and often it's about getting people on that journey and communicating. So we're going to cover lots of that type of thing. We're actually going to someone's house very soon who's got a lot of those technologies in it. That's Robert's house. As you might expect, after doing this for a dozen years, Robert's probably got quite a few of these technologies in his house. Probably too many.
Some would say that.
So we're going to have a look at Robert's house, but he's been living with. He's got a couple of batteries. I think you've got roof-mounted solar, ground-mounted solar, V2G, Zappi, TEPIO, infrared heating, electric
oven.
I have been to Robert's house. It sounds a bit creepy, like I've kind of been looking out through the windows, but we're going to go there and have a look at some of the technologies that he's got. But he doesn't live in a castle, but at the same time, most people just live in a very normal house, and we want to actually go to lots of different normal houses and look at what the real options are, everyday options are.
Yeah, and I suppose it's, we can hold you to account. You've been able to have a lovely house that can hold some of these technologies, and you've done the right thing in having them. I do have this vision of sort of a nutty professor and his sustainable technologies.
The wall in my garage is a bit like that. There's a lot of stuff going on that wall. So the fact is, at night, I actually saw it last night when I got back home quite late. I went, oh my God, there are actual flashing lights. There's little green lights and red lights that flash on my wall, because I don't see them during the day, but I forget that they're there.
Well, I've got lots of inspiration for how we might film that episode, so that's very exciting. We're filming this before we know who the next UK Prime Minister is. I wonder if you have any comments, because I think this will probably go out just after we found out who we're going to be lucky enough.
I think I think it really is about getting the lesser of two evils now. If we were choosing, I don't think I've heard anything in the long drawn out campaign to be Prime Minister which gives me any hope on the energy front. So I think really, without being overly political, I would say, if fracking comes back onto the agenda, we need to express as citizens a strong opinion against that. That is such a regressive move. Things are there, we should be putting a lot of emphasis on insulation and a lot on an education campaign to get people to realize they don't need to use as much energy. I mean, those are the basics. The cheapest energy is the energy you don't use in the first place. I mean, obviously we can talk about solar and heat pumps and V2G and all these things all day long, but the reality is there are some things you could do right now. So we will, I'm sure, do an episode on sort of more cost-effective energy hacks on the channel. And I think we're even talking about doing more kind of episodes on smaller cars, more affordable cars, used cars, also alternatives to cars as well. Because we are very, we're deeply concerned. The UK in particular, for some reason, seems to be especially hard hit at the moment. And I think it could be a long, difficult winter, but we're going to try and keep it positive and informative on the channel. Yeah.
And I think as regards the leadership contest, for the vast majority of the British public, we haven't really got that much interest in it because we haven't got any sway in it. I can't vote for either of them. I don't want to be able to vote for either of them. Frankly, the difference is pretty fractional, and they're both, in my book, utterly dreadful. So, I don't really care who wins. It's going to be bad whoever wins. That's my opinion.
But I would say that in the last few weeks, the Inflation Reduction Act has been announced in America.
Extraordinary, yeah.
And while that is, like most bills passed through the Senate and the Congress, not perfect, that is a huge step forward. So, and if you go back to the previous administration in the US, it was the reverse. So I think, political change without...
Same in Australia. I mean, Australia had an incredibly aggressive regime.
So I think there's a possibility to be optimistic. There are things we could do now, but I think I would like to see almost like a 180 degree from government and being long term. I mean, we're so short term in our decision making. It's crazy. This should be the biggest program since after World War II. We did it with the COVID vaccines, for example. This is a huge mission, but it is being kicked around like a political football by people at the moment.
Yeah, and I think from what we've just mentioned there, that actually whilst it is deeply worrying, deeply concerning, there is cause for optimism because, as you mentioned, we have the technologies available. We definitely have the motivation to do it. Certainly the fully charged community does. And now we need the mechanisms to make them reality and to make them a reality for everyone. And it's not a sprint. Well, it is a sprint, but it's going to be a long sprint.
It's a marathon sprint.
Perhaps a marathon relay.
Let's go for half marathon. Not the full one.
I mean, we're trying to do whatever we can. So we now have a recruitment business because we're aware that getting people into these industries is another blocker. At our live shows, we're doing our home energy advice teams where if you're an interested consumer, you want to start this process, you can sit down with an expert and you can talk through your property, because every property, of course, is so different. So we're doing our utmost because I think at the moment there's a big gap between, yes, I would like to do something, I want to make a change, but I just don't know how, which is why I think electric vehicles are going to be quite popular. It's quite obvious if you switch out a combustion engine car for an electric vehicle, that's significantly better. In the case of homes and businesses, it's much, much more complex. And so hopefully we can help along with our community and also all the stakeholders that we work with to kind of transmit, actually there are other options, but this is how you get into them. It is a problem in the UK. We don't actually have enough installers. And I would say to anyone young who watches this, if you want a job for life, get into renewable energy. That's my opinion. This is going to be it's not a marathon, it's several marathons, but this is going to be 10, 15, 20 years worth of us taking out gas boilers, getting rid of petrol pumps and replacing them with newer, better technologies.
New technologies and some technologies that we haven't even thought of yet, which is so exciting. And that's why we have, I think, the best jobs in the world to go out and find them.
No, you're right, absolutely right,
And ultimately help people identify ways they can save money as well, which is very much needed in these weird and strange times as well. I wonder if there's sort of one last positive message that we can leave people with.
I mean, I think that, well, I'll just very briefly, I think that that if we can achieve close to 100% renewable energy in this century, it will be cheaper. It just is. There's just no argument against it. It is a more sustainable, longer lasting way. We need a circular economy where the materials in those technologies are used again and again. It just is a cheaper way of operating. We're not importing fossil fuel or any fuel from from around the other side of the world. Like we've just had a delivery of natural gas from Australia. That is unsustainable, regardless of any other consideration, climate change, anything. Forget that. You're bringing a boat 12,000 miles around the world with some gas in it. Just get over it. So that is really the critical thing, that the more we head in that direction. And what's amazing is there's lots and lots of big companies that are moving in that direction really fast, even if the government is dragging its feet. And that's the case all around the world. And even under the last administration in America, all the cities that were going towards zero carbon, that didn't stop, so it is. I think it's now an unstoppable transition, and I think it's very positive. But that's we've got to grip onto that hope, because it's going to be tough for the next few years.
This is a mega trend. The lowering in cost of batteries and the increasing of energy density is just one sliver of that mega trend away from fossil fuels to cleaner sources. It's unstoppable. It can be slowed down by governments, but it's much, much bigger than governments and corrupt politicians who are far too close to the fossil fuel industry. And I think people have had enough. I think there might be 5-10% of people who are very vocal on Question Time or on Twitter who want to stir the pot and say, actually, no, it should be hydrogen for heating, or it should be hydrogen for cars, or it should be fracking. But I think people in general, the bulk, have had enough. And I do think that what you've seen in Australia with the change of administration, what you've seen in the US, although whether that will stick or not, I don't know, you will see, I think, in the UK. And the UK has got some brilliant tech companies in this space, some of the best in the world. Support us, support those companies if you're able, and spread the word. Stop burning stuff is our kind of mantra. Help us get it out there. Share the Fully Charged show, and if you have actually installed some of these technologies, shout about it. Tell your friends how you go on with it. But first of all, insulation and those things, those more affordable things. That's where we need to, I think, up the ante as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that's given us just a small glimpse into what we can expect on the channel in the next few months. If you do have any thoughts about what you want to see and what you want us to be talking about and exploring, please do let us know in the comments. It's a really helpful way for us to understand what it is that you want and what we should be talking about. So if you have been, thanks for watching.